All right, today we're going to talk about the lesson plan. At the beginning of the lesson plan is the duration of the lesson, which is how long the lesson is going to be, then the grade level, and then the subject. So at first there's the essential literacy strategy focus, which is at the end of my unit, what do I want my students to learn? And then the related skills are what have they learned previously that they will need to understand the essential literacy strategy focus. And then there's the content focus, which certain lesson plans may have or may not have. Then there's the standards. So what Common Core standards back up my essential literacy strategy focus? And then we have the instructional learning objectives, which is how will students master the central focus and how will I assess them, either formally or informally. And then we have the language functions, which is how students will use language and the purpose that the language and the purpose of the language that's being used. And then the vocabulary we need to understand to be able to master our language function. And then these are the materials that I'm going to need for my lesson. And then I have the student prior knowledge. So what did they learn before? What did they learn in the previous lessons that they could use, the previous knowledge that they could use to understand this lesson? And then I have the introduction or the transition from the previous activity. So how will I introduce my students to this new lesson? Incorporate on their prior knowledge, like it says over here. And the hook, how will I engage them? How will I want them to participate? And how will I get them interested in learning this lesson? So the focused instruction, the guided instruction, and the independent practice all have differentiating and scaffolds, which are all during these types of instructions, how I'm going to help either students with 504s, IEPs, or English language students, how I'm going to support them in their learning while I'm doing either my focus instruction, which is I'm teaching the lesson, or the guided instruction practice, which is when students are working collaboratively, either in partners or in groups, or independent practice when they're practicing what they've learned by themselves. So during these three instructional practices, how I'm going to help them learn as well. And then last, it's the closure, which is how I'm going to bring this activity to an end. And to assure that they understood the lesson and how I'm going to talk about the next lesson for the next day. So now that I went through this lesson plan, I'm going to bring up a lesson plan from 2017, actually. I chose this lesson plan because I subbed for a long time and I took a long-term sub position, and I'm actually very familiar with this book that she used. It's based on the Common Core in 8th grade. I'm very familiar with this because I used it in my long-term subclass, so I understood what she was talking about. So her essential literacy strategy focus is she's going to review system of equations and their solutions and draw conclusions based on visual representations, construct graphs of linear equations based on y-intercept and slopes. So she's doing 3 different things in this lesson. She's teaching system of equations. So when you graph linear equations, what points do they share in common? And then she's not only having them do that, she's having them graph it once they can solve that. So what they need to know before working on the essential literacy focus is graphing, ordered pairs, slope-intercept form, linear equations. Just understand the basics of system of equations. And she has her content focus here, which basically just elaborates on the essential literacy strategy focus. These are the 2 Common Core standards that she discusses in this lesson plan. And then this is how she's going to check for students' understanding, or how she's going to support their learning by, I feel like she could have elaborated a little bit more, but by group and combine like terms to simplify algebraic expressions, match vocabulary with mathematical functions, and put equations in slope-intercept form. She assesses this all by having them work in the workbook and kind of answering questions and walking around. And then here, she checks for language functions by graphing and then talking about solutions that they graphed, and then understanding the specific vocabulary in terms of slopes is very important to be able to understand what they're asking in her language functions. And then this is the material that the students will need. The Module 8 packet sounds, it's definitely the focus of this whole lesson. And then this is the prior knowledge that they learned previously. They started learning about this actually in 7th grade, which is graphing pairs and linear equations, and working with parts of an equation as slope-intercept form, rise over run. And then this she introduces and transitions kind of by going from single graphs to single linear graphs to multiple linear graphs, kind of showing the comparison. And the hook is kind of starting this new unit and talking about it. So she does, I've noticed, for her focus instruction, guided instruction, and independent practice, it's all out of the workbook. So for her focus instruction, she's reviewing previous concepts they have learned, and then she's going to go into a system of equations and how to graph them. Then she's going to have students practice it on the board and work by themselves for about 7 minutes to review. And she's going to go around and monitor students and make sure they're good, and ask them to read the questions and have other students around them basically help them. Then she has, as part of her collaborative learning, she kind of has everyone work kind of as a class by reviewing the vocabulary, and then kind of talk about with their groups for talk in their table groups to work on the extra vocabulary page. And then independent practice is multiple worksheets that not only review linear equations, but also go over system of equations. And she'll be walking around class to making sure that students understand. And then last but not least, her closure. I like this idea of an exit ticket, which is like a small piece of paper. And this is right here. These are two linear equations. And she's going to have them find the ordered pair solution that they have in common, and then give it to her, and they can, to assure that they understand what they're doing. So this is all the material. These are all the pages that she'll be working on. This is a book, a Common Core book, so it really goes into detail and explanation on how to do every single piece of this lesson. So that is the lesson plan.